Sure.
So please welcome Von Diaz. She is an Emmy award-winning, we'll get in 1 sec. And Von Diaz is an Emmy award-winning documentarian food historian. She's the author of Coconuts and Collards, Recipes and Stories from Puerto Rico in the Deep South, and Islas, a celebration of tropical cooking, which take us on a gastronomic island-hopping adventure around the globe to learn about island culture and the people who live on them. She's also the founder of La Piña, a Substack newsletter covering the people, ingredients, and systems that shape global cuisine. She was born in Puerto Rico, raised in Atlanta, graduated right here from Agnes Scott College. Yes, she explores the intersections of food culture and identity. She has contributed recipes and essays to numerous cookbooks and anthologies. She's a frequent contributor to the New York Times, as well as Washington Post, NPR, StoryCorps, Food and Wine Magazine, Bon Appetit, among many others. It's a privilege to have you here at the Decatur Book Festival. Please welcome Von Diaz.
Thank you.
All right, so tell us what you're going to be cooking today.
Okay, I'm really excited to show y'all how to prepare a dish from Guam. Show of hands, how many folks feel like they're pretty familiar with Guam as an island? Okay, we got one. All right, so as no shade. As Ligaya mentioned, my newest book is Islas, a celebration of tropical cooking. And for this book, I spent 2 years studying the tropics, right? So the central band of the planet. And the inspiration from this book came from my Puerto Rican upbringing and also my travels throughout the world and noticing similar dishes, but also similar techniques that were used in all of these places, and to sort of start to interrogate those similarities and hopefully create kind of a bridge across the tropics. So Guam is a U.S. territory like Puerto Rico. They have U.S. phone numbers, they use U.S. money. It is part of the United States. It is halfway across the planet. It's in the Pacific Ocean. And it is an island that immediately captured my attention because it felt so similar to Puerto Rico, even though the cultures there are so different. The people of Guam are the Chamorro, and their ancestry dates back to some of the earliest humans on this planet. And so their cooking represents some of that ancestry, and also, I think above and beyond, is a reflection of the kind of cooking that you see on islands a lot, right? What do we have available? What can we prepare when the power goes out, when the water goes out, right? When the gas goes out? And dishes that are intended to be prepared family style to share with your community. So this is a really good example of that. It's really simple. There are, how many ingredients are in this dish? I want to say 8, maybe something like that. And it is also, I think, one of the most, increasingly the most common kinds of dishes that you'll see in any culture. Aromatics like onions and garlic, chicken on rice, right? We make it in the South, we make it across the tropics, and so it's a staple. And I'm gonna prepare this dish as written, which again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 ingredients. 11 if you count the rice that you eat it on. But I'm gonna prepare it as written, and then along the way, I'll sort of share some tips and tricks, because most island cuisine, in my experience, is very adaptable, right? If you really like ginger, that can go in here too. If you like black vinegar, that can go in here too. If you prefer white meat chicken, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what we're gonna do.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll let you get started, and then I'm just gonna pepper you with questions once you get moving on that.
Yes, and thank you to Lodge for these gorgeous pans that we get to use. If this one ends up in my suitcase, I wouldn't be mad. Maybe not this one, it's a little big. Yeah, hit me.
Okay, I'm gonna hit you.
So I'm turning the heat up here to about medium high.
So yeah, I want you to talk a little bit about, these recipes hail from the Indian Ocean, the Atlantic, the Pacific. And some of the unifying aspects of these, like as you saw themes emerge, can you talk a little bit more about, for example, the pantry, and even technique, because you do focus a lot on technique here, some of the commonalities in terms of that technique. So talk to us a little bit about the things that unified these countries from around the world.
Yeah. So Islas is actually organized by technique. I identified 6 of what I call ancestral cooking techniques: marinating, pickling and fermentation, deep frying, braising, grilling and smoking over open fire, and steaming, both inside leaves and making rice. And part of the reason for that organizing principle was that was the similarity that I saw. It wasn't necessarily the ingredient or even the dish. It was how people cooked, right? The tools that they would use, the vessels that they would use, even small things, but like lots and lots and lots, again, of like one pot dishes. So, across the tropics, those 5 techniques are king, queen, what have you. And I will say, though, that braising, which is the technique that we're using here, braising and stewing, is by far the most common across the tropics. It's the largest chapter in here, but I could have written a whole book just on braising and stewing.
So tell us a little bit about some of the adventures that you took as you were doing your research.
So many adventures. I just put in 2 tablespoons of vegetable oil. And these are chopped white onions. Adventures, probably the 2 most exciting adventures were going to Curacao, which is an island that always kind of fascinated me. It's in the Caribbean, but it's closest to South America, right? And I was immediately, Ligaya, can I have you stir this, actually?
Sure, absolutely.
I forgot there was something I needed to do. Okay. See, that's why we have our friends here. There we go. So Curacao is a gorgeous, gorgeous island, and I'm just going to peel these and chop them. That is a desert. So most of the islands that I've visited were arguably, keep stirring, please. Sorry. Sorry to put you to work. I just don't want them to burn.
No, my favorite.
And I'll turn the heat down so we don't feel like we need to rush. So I had never imagined an island that was any different than my island. I thought they were sort of all tropical, all sort of rainforested. But Curacao is a desert, and very, very, very dry, very hot in a different way, and it is so incredibly beautiful there. And while I was there, I learned about the particular Dutch influence that that led to the formation of that cuisine. Oh, thank you.
Wow.
You can talk. Yeah.
Perfection. So, it's very interesting in particular because each colonizer, this has been a point of inquiry for me as a researcher. Each colonizer had a particular identity, right? And the Dutch, when they left Curacao, and forgive me, I'm forgetting the year, they ultimately just sort of, they left, and they left the island to the enslaved people. So, today, they remain a Dutch protectorate, but the way in which the African communities that were already there were able to preserve their foodways. It means that when you're in Curacao, it's very African there. And that part was really fascinating to me. And there I saw something really interesting. So we all know what gumbo is, right? So in Curacao, they have a dish, and this is in Islas, called gumbo. And it is a literally snot-like okra stew that it's like when you pull up this thing, it's like this long, mucilaginous is the word that I learned mucilaginous. I like snot-like just fine. It's funny. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. So I just chopped 2 big cloves of garlic, and I'm gonna chop these Thai chilies. I'll take a break here because I really should be using gloves to chop these, but I'm a big girl and I can, I don't mind. I just won't touch my eyes or my nose afterwards.
And you leave, I'm just looking there, you left the seeds
I'm leaving the seeds in, yes, because this is a dish that is spicy. So if you want your dish to be spicy, you leave those seeds in. So one last note on working with fresh chilies. It was one of the revelations of this book because Puerto Rican food is not spicy at all. It's quite mild. We put hot stuff on our food. We don't put hot things in our food. And chilies have oils that will stay in your skin for a really long time. So there are parts of your body that you should not touch when you have just chopped a chili, right? And you need to really wash your hands multiple times before it's over. Okay, I can take over now. All right. Did I answer your question? Okay, so Curacao. I also went to the Seychelles, which is a tiny island archipelago, which means a series of islands. I can't remember exactly how many. Nearest to the Maldives, which folks are typically familiar with. It's on like everyone's like big bucket list when they win the lottery. And Seychelles is very similar geographically, but it's sort of just like a different kind of structure. And I didn't know, please forgive me if something that y'all knew, that cinnamon, cinnamon sticks, those are not sticks that like hang from a tree. A cinnamon stick is bark that is peeled off of a cinnamon tree. So the Seychelles are covered in cinnamon trees, which were brought there by the French. And so the whole island, to me, felt like perfumed with cinnamon, but not like cinnamon like you would put in your pumpkin spice latte, right? Like cinnamon, like this earthy sort of cinnamon bark smell. And the number of spices that I encountered there, nutmeg, allspice, things of that nature, were really remarkable. And tons of curd.
When I think about your book and also some others that the authors that are here today, and even Ann Byrne, who was just here, what I really appreciate about your book is the stories that you share, the stories from people and some of the people that you met, where I don't feel like I'm just, okay, here's a recipe and it's from Guam. Like telling us about maybe a person who has a business or whoever, but the real islanders. Can you talk to us about some of those people that maybe had an impact on you? Absolutely.
Y'all heard my long resume, and I imagine you were like, when does this woman sleep? The answer is that I don't, to be perfectly honest, but I am a oral historian and journalist by training. And so no matter what I'm doing, whether it's cooking, I want to know about people. I want to know about their lives, their history, their culture. Culture fascinates me. The specificity of culture, right? How does one place next to another place? I mean, we see this all over the South, right? In the American South, we eat a certain way. In New England, we eat a certain way, right? And all of that stems from history. So I met some really amazing characters as I was working on this. And here we go. Pause, onions, garlic, chilies. I'm sure that y'all have done this sort of thing a million times. It's basically like a spicy mirepoix, minus carrots and celery, and it is the foundation of flavor. So now I have some chicken that my friends have portioned out for me, and we'll do salt, pepper, soy sauce, and vinegar, which I'll talk about in a moment. So when I started working on Islas, I knew that I didn't want this to be a book about restaurants or food businesses, right? Because while food businesses are the most kind of recognizable and visible ways in which we're able to experience another culture's food, the vast majority of everyday people are not eating at restaurants all the time, right? So while it's a reflection of the way that a culture wants to represent itself, it is not necessarily a reflection of how people cook at home. And I really wanted to know about people who cook at home because I'm not a trained cook. I learned from my grandmother and my mom and YouTube and the Betty Crocker cookbook and you name it, right? Like that's how I learned to cook. And I'm just giving this a little browning right now before I turn to my spices. So in Guam, for example, watching YouTube, learning about Guam, encountered a woman who isn't a food person. She actually said she doesn't like to cook at all. But she is an activist, and she started a really beautiful project for girls in Guam to have a safe space to come. Rates of violence against women in Guam are very, very high, and so she created kind of a clubhouse for them. And so that clubhouse ultimately expanded into a thrift store that gives clothing away for free to mothers in need, and also a community garden. And the story that I tell in Islas is that this woman whose name is Juanita Blas, was really inspired to do that by her own grandmother, and hearing all young people in Guam not know where their food actually came from, because they'd only ever seen packaged food at the grocery store. So she says that teaching young girls how to grow their own food is a way that she's protecting and empowering them. Right, so that's one story. I'll go back to Curacao. There's a woman there named Josephine. She goes by Jojo. Hold on 1 second. Salt, pepper, soy, vinegar. Got it. She goes by Jojo. And Josephine also, not a particularly good cook. But she's a really sassy woman. I want to say she's in her late 50s now. And she didn't have any children, and was just kind of working and felt kind of bored with her jobs and wanted to do something different. So one day she just started a bar on her porch. And she lived in Curacao. I was mentioning earlier this sort of continuance of these African cultures, these West African cultures. So in Curacao, people will often live in this kind of compound. So it's like six elements of the family are living fairly close to one another. So it was a hit. She started a bar. Everybody started coming through, right? And what happened was that she was very good at making cocktails, and there was nothing to eat. So she was dealing with some rather intoxicated customers, and she was like, "Ooh, let me make some wings." So she started, apparently her grandmother was like known for her chicken wings, and she started just making chicken wings specifically for these overly intoxicated people that were her customers at the bar, and the rest is history. So she used her grandmother's secret spice blend, which she did not give me, y'all. That's not what's in this book. Basically, I tasted enough wings and I took notes, and I was like, I think this is probably what's in here. So my recipe for her wings includes what my palate told me was in the food. That's another person who really warmed my heart and really inspired me, because for her, it was like, so often folks have these long resumes like I do about food, but JoJo was like, people were hungry. I needed a bar. I started making chicken wings, and I just love that because her chicken wings are so good that people come, tourists, members of government, come all the way to this lower part of the island just to have her wings.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Now, did
chicken
you
wings are
go
delicious.
to travel to all of the countries who are, that are featured here with recipes featured in the book?
Sadly not, because most of this book was written during the pandemic. So, and in fact, it was a real blessing because I sort of traveled to these places through cooking and through the dishes. So I was doing this kind of culinary tourism in my house. And we remember what the pandemic was like, y'all. We just, we were trying to figure things out. But I have traveled to 10 tropical islands in my life, and now I have a bunch more on my list. I've never been to your homeland in the Philippines, but we
need to go together. I haven't either. It's very expensive.
Yeah, no, I'm as I told you, my partner and my stepdaughter are Filipino, and the flavors actually of this dish, good segue, are very similar to Filipino food. So I just put in a fair amount of soy sauce, as you saw, and I'm gonna put in coconut vinegar. So this is an ingredient that's pretty common in Southeast Asia. It's most closely related in flavor to, and I know I have some measuring spoons over there, but I literally never use measuring spoons unless I'm baking. But it is, apple cider vinegar is probably the closest comparison. And that's a fair amount of vinegar to put in a dish, right? Like I just put in 2 tablespoons. And you can definitely smell it. But the use of vinegar is another thing that I saw a lot in the tropics because it tenderizes the meat, right? It gives your meat a really amazing texture. And then it also, something that I learned in my cooking, in cooking tropical food, is that chilies and vinegar, when they hit your tongue, right? When they hit your palate, open up your taste buds. That's part of what they do. And so a lot of what I saw in tropical cooking was the use of ingredients that would like kind of punch you in the face with flavor, which makes a lot of sense when you consider that all of these islands import the vast majority of their food. Most of these islands are dealing with economic insecurity, either caused by colonization or caused by constant storms. And so that means that they are often using less than ideal ingredients, right? Probably tougher cuts of meat that you cook for longer. And when you're dealing with ingredients like that, it is important to infuse them with flavor. So vinegar is one of the agents that like boosts flavor.
Talk to us a little bit about, fish and seafood, because obviously island culture, you're going to get a lot of that in your diet. What are some things that you learned about the treatment of fish and seafood?
I think the thing that really stood out to me is that we associate seafood with islands, right? It makes sense. They're surrounded by water. But in fact, because of a variety of factors, tourism, overfishing, right? Commercial fishing in a variety of places. Puerto Rico is one example. Only 10% of the seafood that we eat in Puerto Rico comes from its waters. So what I observed is that if the coastal towns on islands, tons of seafood. The Seychelles sits in the Indian Ocean, is one of the most abundant waters for seafood on this planet. Tuna, all kinds of delicious things. And so in Seychelles, it was seafood everywhere, octopus, this, that, and the other. But in Puerto Rico, I was more likely to find pork and chicken dishes than I was finding seafood dishes. So, there's a lot of contradiction, I think, to island communities. There's sort of how they are presented to us as these like exotic locations, places that we dream of going, paradises, right? And in the island, in fact, the way of eating is quite humble and quite different.
Before we got started with this, you and I were chatting about the Philippines in particular, because you do have some ties there, and I do as well. And one of the things that I asked you about was a military presence in certain island nations. And can you talk a little bit about what that influence how we see that influencing some of the cuisine?
Definitely. So for folks who aren't aware of this, while the Philippines today is an independent country, it had this really intense period of history where it was a pseudo colony of the United States. And so when I think of the Philippines, I think of the Philippines in the same way that I think of the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, Puerto Rico, right? Like they had, the U.S. arrived there at similar moments in history. So I'll stick to Guam since that's where we're cooking from. Something that I couldn't have imagined is that, as I mentioned earlier, Guam and the Chamorro people are they're an ancient culture, right? They're connected to the Melanesian populations. And the people there I don't want to say they were vegetarian, but they, like a lot of indigenous communities, seafood, shellfish, fruit, vegetables that grew abundantly. So that was sort of the base of the diet. But when the U.S. military arrived, and you see this happening in Cuba, in Puerto Rico, again, in all of these different places, the Marianas Islands as well, the U.S. military, soldiers needed meat, right? These are American soldiers who were accustomed to having an abundance of animal protein available to them. And so one of the things that was readily imported was animal protein, right? In particular, beef and chicken at large scales. So then those meats became part of the cuisines of those places. And so one of the most beloved kind of styles of cooking in, I know, it's delicious.
Smelling so good.
Does it smell like adobo to you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Nice amount of vinegar in there.
Is barbecue. So the Chamorro people are in love with barbecue, and they have these just giant, and the one place I keep somehow forgetting is the island that is a state, Hawaii, right? So basically everything that I have shared with y'all about the territory islands is absolutely the case in Hawaii, big time, and maybe to a higher level because it is a state. And so, much more beholden to U.S. policies. But, it's sort of, I would argue, a mixed bag, right? I won't go into sort of the complex politics of having a U.S. military presence be the primary source of employment, which is the case in Guam and in a lot of other places. So I'll stay in food because we could be here all day. But the imposition of certain kinds of shelf-stable ingredients, corned beef, Spam, and things of that nature, that is directly connected to U.S. military influence. I think what surprised me, though, is that I, being Puerto Rican and that being sort of my frame of reference, I thought that the use of shelf-stable foods was an American military influence thing. Every island in the tropics imports the majority of its food, because these are small places, they're incredibly environmentally vulnerable, they can't grow enough food for their population and the tourists, right? Because many of the most highly touristed islands on this planet get 3 times the amount of tourists to population, right? So if their population is 100,000 people, they get 300,000 tourists a year. So not only does the island have to feed its people in all of their stages of life, but then all of the tourists that come through who have very specific desires and needs.
That's really interesting. Now,
Yeah.
but when it does come to food that is of there, were there some ingredients that you worked with that you hadn't ever worked with
So
before?
many.
Like, I mean, I guess if we're talking produce, for example, or maybe some spices. Tell us about like those discoveries.
Let's see. I mean, chilies for sure. I know so much about chilies, habaneros, Scotch bonnets, Thai chilies. I have a really good sense of the range of those chilies and how to use them in what abundance. And something that I think folks who are of cultures like Mexican culture that uses a lot of different kinds of chilies have different flavors, right? They're not just painful. They're like, some are fruity, some are more earthy. That's definitely one. I have about 15 different vinegars in my house now, and I used to have one. I used to just have white distilled vinegar because that's what we use in Puerto Rico, right? And now I have coconut vinegar, palm vinegar, coconut vinegar with spices, you know.
Nice.
And I have a vinegar experiment in my pantry that started as me forgetting some tamarind was for a little bit, and then it started to turn into something, and I was like, there's no animal protein in there. It's probably fine, and it probably won't make me sick. So we'll see how that turns out. Yeah. But yeah, I would say vinegars, chilies, different kinds of like oxtail was not something that I had worked with very much. Tendon, chicken feet, things I had not worked with before. And I think probably if I had to identify the most surprising one of the most surprising thing about this book is the use of curry. There were curries all over the entire Indian Ocean region and, of course, the Caribbean, right? Jamaica, Trinidad, all of the places that were colonized by the UK.
If you had to pick one recipe, and I'm sure they're all your babies, but
They are.
what would be one that you would really want us, like, make this recipe? If you're going to cook from this book, this is the one you really, really should cook.
Oh gosh.
Or name a couple if you
I'm
want
like,
to.
I don't even know that I can answer that. So one that I personally love that's very popular on the New York Times site is my sazon marinated chicken. Do y'all have sazon in your house? Are you familiar with this ingredient? I know you do, Lisa. So sazon is a spice blend. It typically has achote or annatto in it, which is like a coloring agent, and it's salty and delicious. So literally that, some garlic, some fresh orange juice, marinate, cook it, chicken breast, whatever you want to do. People love that recipe.
Sazon, by the way, is something that I actually take when I'm traveling, because if
Yes,
you're gonna,
you can use it on anything.
It's a great seasoning. You have these like little packets, like bouillon cube
That's right.
packets.
That's right.
And it's a powerhouse of flavor.
You're so smart to do that. I don't know why I haven't thought to do that.
TSA
then you can
won't
cook
take
anything.
it from you.
They won't. But TSA did take my chickpeas not that long ago when I was traveling. I was really upset. They told me they were spreadable. I was like, I literally was crying. I was like, these are beans. Do you see them? They're beans. They're like, you could spread that. I'm like, so you're telling me that these beans are explosive. You know what? Anyway, I've had some, because I recipe test, right? So sometimes I travel with the things that I'm working on. I saw the 15-minute sign a minute ago, so I think we should.
All right, yes, we can absolutely
from
open
y'all.
it to the rest of you. If you have any questions, just raise your hand.
I want to know where to get the sazon spice.
Literally anywhere. You could honestly, you probably get it at the gas station. No, I'm serious. I've seen it at gas stations before. So I mean, Kroger definitely has it.
Will you spell it?
Sazon. Sazon.
Go ahead.
And I feel like today it's not even in like the international section because it's so commonly used. So, but if you don't see it in the regular spice section, go to the international section, and it's either in boxes or like there's a lot of McCormick actually has a sazon. There's tons and tons. Whole Foods has a really good brand called Loisa that they just started carrying, and that they use organic ingredients. It's a small company, but yes, literally anywhere.
Thank you.
Yeah. Even in Georgia.
What were some of the most popular vegetarian dishes that you saw, if any?
I'm so glad you asked that question because minutes before I filed my manuscript, I texted my editor in a panic and said, there aren't any vegetables in this book. Is that going to be okay? So that was interesting to me because it's not that island communities don't eat vegetables. It's that this book, because it's a celebration, really kind of focuses on those like national dishes, the favored dishes, the ones you make on the holidays. But eggplant, so many different ways to prepare eggplant. I saw, at least in Puerto Rico, the tropics are so hot that you have to eat vegetables quickly, right? They're not gonna keep on the countertop. Like you'll put a banana on the countertop in the morning, by the evening it's like already overripe, right? So lots of let's see, things like chayote, which is a kind of squash. As I already said, cabbage. Different kinds of delicate greens that you would either turn into salads or just like wilt in a broth. Okra, all over the planet. Tons of okra. What else did I see prominently featured? In this book, the pickling, the pickling and fermentation chapter has a ton of vegetables, but also things like papaya, green papaya pickled so that it's savory. Yeah, those are the ones that are coming to mind. This is an auntie technique, by the way. Just like if you don't want to take the lid off of something, but you want to make sure it's not sticking, just give it a little.
Great.
Hi.
My question. Hi, how are you?
Good.
My question is, I come from a West African background, and a lot of our cooking does not include dairy products, just because a lot of folks are lactose intolerant.
That's right.
And so I was curious about that, and just doing research, a lot of the planet is actually lactose intolerant, which is interesting.
Correct.
And so I was curious, were there any dietary restrictions that came up quite often that led to kind of creative dishes or just ways of cooking that are not typical in maybe some Western cultures?
Yeah, I'll try to keep this brief because you've hit on something that I find endlessly fascinating. So most human beings lose the ability to process lactose when they're 2 years old. Most human beings, that's just genetic, that's just biological, right? However, cultures that come from places where dairy was critical to survival, all of Scandinavia, right? Most of Northern Europe, those cultures and cultures that stem from those geographic regions have a heightened ability to process dairy. Who are the cultures that founded this country, right? Or who took it from the Native Americans? Those were, right, Northern European countries. And so what's fascinating to me is that we think of it as a Western phenomenon, but it's that the cultures and communities that were using a lot of that ingredient that had developed the genetic disposition to be able to process them were the ones that were really formative for the United States. So our obsession with cheese, I would argue, is more connected to that, right? To that point of origin. In Puerto Rico, we love American cheese. We melted on that, but you won't find dairy in Puerto Rican food unless it's in a dessert. And I saw that, I don't think there's only one cheese in this whole book, and it's a Dutch recipe from Curacao. Yeah.
Thank you for coming. It's been so nice.
Hi, thank you.
I'm not sure where you live now, but it seems like you're kind of familiar with Atlanta. I was going to see if you had any restaurants that you really like here with tropical influence.
So many restaurants. Kimball House is so good, and I've known the founders since before they opened it, so it was for 11, 12 years now. The restaurant is 11 years old. It is delicious. I just had dinner there last night and didn't have a single bad flavor in my mouth the whole time. If I'm gonna be honest, I wish that I could teleport to Buford Highway quickly and not have to drive there and deal with the traffic, because if I could, I would eat on Buford Highway every single day of the week. It is the most fascinating. I've written 3 articles about Buford Highway because I find it so wonderful and abundant. What are other places that I love? I love Miller Union. I've known Steven Satterfield for a long time. What else do I like? I used to love the Taqueria del Sol a lot when I lived here. It's still delicious. Oh yes. And but again, Buford Highway, there's a restaurant there called Kamaya. Is it Kamayan ATL or something? It is delicious. But go to Buford Highway and spend the day. Go for dim sum, have a cocktail, have a light lunch, stay for dinner. It's like an adventure. So I'm gonna finish this dish up with what's basically the last step, and I haven't been keeping track of time, but I have been pressing on the protein to make sure that it's getting softer and softer. The very last thing that you do here is this is a whole can of coconut milk. And the reason that you add it at the end is that we have a lot of acid in this dish. And if you were to add it at the beginning, it's possible, if not likely, that the fat in the coconut milk would start to separate. And so you wouldn't have a kind of rich, velvety, creamy sauce. You might have something that's a little bit more like when your milk curdles in your coffee, and nobody likes that. I'm pretty sure nobody likes when their milk curdles in their coffee. So so this will just come back up to temp, simmer for a little bit longer, and then it's ready to go. You could from here, this is meat on the bone, you could actually pull the meat off the bone and let this be like a stewy, delicious kind of rich thing. You could serve each individual piece of chicken on rice, pour sauce on it. You can throw vegetables in here if you want. A eggplant would probably be good, carrots, celery, greens, right? So it's really, this is one of my favorite preparations. And chicken thighs, I used to be a chicken breast exclusively person. Chicken thighs just have so much flavor.
It smells so good.
Yeah.
I do have a question for you, and since that this is your second book. Your first book was more of a personal exploration, right?
Definitely.
With your roots in Puerto Rico, and in this one, you're really looking at island culture. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what your next project is going to be?
Ooh, okay, yeah, hot tip. So I'm starting to work on a book that will be sort of a continuation of Islas, and I don't have a title yet, but it is going to be about deserts. So I'm going to basically take the same principles of this book, so an approach that's focused on technique and not necessarily on place or ingredient or dish, and explore the techniques that desert communities have perfected all over the planet.
Oh, that's super. I can't wait to read it.
I can't wait to start working on it. My agent keeps encouraging me not to work on it. She's like, Vaughn, your book is still out. And I'm like, I know, but the ideas, if I don't grab them, they might go somewhere.
That's really exciting. Let's see. I just have a couple of announcements. I think we're pretty much, unless anybody else has any questions. Any more questions for Vaughn? Oh, yeah.
I don't believe that we were going to do samples, but I don't know how we could live with ourselves if we discarded it. So I'm going to let the organizers decide if we can serve some of this up for folks. Yeah, they're my boss. So I would love for you to try it, because I just tasted it and it's really good.
It smells wonderful. Well, Von Diaz, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Just a couple of announcements here. As you mentioned before, her book is available for sale in the back, and then she will be signing, and you can also purchase books outside and around up at the tents up that way. I do also want to invite you to come back here at 1:45 till 2:30. Erica Council will be here. And
Please come for Erica's workshop. Erica, I've known Erica for over a decade, and I'm just fascinated by her, and she's so amazing.
she's
Please come back
amazing
for Erica.
biscuit woman.
Yes.
That'll be followed by Susie Karachian at 3, and then Todd Richards with Soul Food at 4:15. And I do want to make an announcement because we were supposed to have another chef just after this one named William Disson, and he's not able to come today. He owns a restaurant
Bless his heart.
in Asheville called The
Oh,
Marketplace.
bless his heart. Oh.
And so obviously he's been very impacted by the hurricane. So I wanted to let you know, and I speak only on behalf of, as the food and dining editor for the AJC, where I will be on Monday. It's a fundraiser. It's open. It's been put on by numerous Atlanta restaurants who have banded together to put on a buffet-style dinner. It's $50 a person. It's at Sweet Auburn Barbecue. All of the fund proceeds are going directly to help World Central Kitchen up in the Asheville area. So if you're interested, you can go to the Sweet Auburn Barbecue website and nab yourself a ticket. But anyway, William wishes he could be here, but he has important things to do there. So thank you all very much for coming, and I hope that you join us at 1:45.